Hi, now topic for today's conversation is, has the Megane Renault Sport 280 lost the plot, or is it still the king of hot hatches? Now then, I have to admit some interest in this because I'm a bit of a Renault Sport fan. I love the two previous generations of Megane Renault Sport. I used to run a Clio 197 Cup and I used to own a 172 Cup. So yes, I do like a fast Renault. But I have to confess, I was a little bit disappointed when I first heard about this car. It seemed like Renault Sport, especially after the slightly disappointing Clio 200, had slightly lost the plot and gone all high-tech. Four-wheel steering, things like that, it all sounded a little bit gimmicky and not the kind of hardcore purist Renault Sport that people like me used to enjoy so much. Also, the competition has kind of upped its game somewhat, hasn't it? So you've got cars like the Hyundai i30N, which is kind of very much treading on Renault Sport's turf previously. The Golf in its various forms is all-conquering. The Civic is just mad. So yes, Renault Sport has really had to pull out all the stops to counter that. Has it? Well, there's the big question. When this car turned up, I was pleasantly surprised. It looks a lot better than I expected. Now, there's a lot to talk about with it. Let's have a quick spec overview. You can get the 280 in standard sport form or with the Cup chassis, which costs another £1,500 in the usual Renault Sport way. That gets you stiffer springs, stiffer anti-roll bars, limited slip differential. So it's kind of all the good stuff that we used to like on previous Megane Renault Sports. This one has also been upgraded with £900 worth of Brembo brakes, bigger, vented, better for heat dissipation on track, things like that. So kind of in spec, this one's not too far off the range-topping Trophy 300, which has also just been announced. So it's got it all there on the spec sheet. Does it have it out on the road? That's the important question. Let's find out. Now, it's always the danger when you have high expectations that you will be let down, and few cars come with higher expectations than a new Megane Renault Sport. So, does this new 280 live up to that fabulous legacy of the previous Meganes that I personally and many other people have loved so much? Well, as I was saying, the game has kind of moved on a bit, hasn't it? And there is a worry that, a bit like another car that I love a lot, the Subaru Impreza, that things have just changed and Renault Sport is kind of ploughing the same furrow but has been kind of left behind. So let's have a look at what this car brings to the party, namely an awful lot of tech. Now, what I quite like about Renault Sport, I have liked in the past, is that their cars have never really been about the kind of headline figures, the 0 to 60s, the top speeds and stuff that other people go chasing. Renault Sports have all been about handling and suspension and tech. Now, working from the front, this car has a lot of tech, but it's the kind of proper engineering. It's not computer simulation. So we have in this Cup equipped car a limited slip diff. It's a Torsen, not a helical like the previous Renault Sport Megane, so it'll be interesting to see the difference there. It's supposed to be a little bit more aggressive in its setup. We've still got the Perfo hub suspension struts on the front, which are another key feature. For those who don't know about the Perfo hub, it's an offset steering axis. It's a bit like the Revo knuckle Ford developed for the Focus RS a few years back. There have been versions of it in various other cars in the past, but it's an expensive engineering solution that intends to get rid of torque steer and reduce the interference of drive torque on the front wheel. So an expensive engineering feature that not every hot hatch manufacturer goes for. We've got those fancy brakes, which are nice, and then of course we've got four-wheel steering on this one as well. Engine is a 1.8 litre turbo, 280 horsepower, decent torque. It's the same as the one in the Alpine, but it's got more power than that car. There's a whole load of modes and stuff like that we've not seen on a Renault Sport before. Again, for a kind of hardcore fan, that's kind of a little bit worrying, because you think, you know, the only mode you're really interested in a Renault Sport is the one that the engineers came up with, because they know what they're doing. Why does Renault have to kind of follow the herd and go for all that configurability that everybody else seems to have as an excuse for not being able to set a car up properly? So it's kind of a mixture of news, isn't it? There's the good news that Renault Sport is stuck with the kind of hardcore engineering bits and bobs that make its cars handle well, but there's also the worry that it's kind of following the herd in terms of tech, and the kind of peril with this car is whether the tech enhances the experience or dilutes it, and that for a Renault Sport customer is the kind of $1 million question, because anything that dilutes from the purity is really going to be a deal breaker, isn't it? So first, the good news, and that is that this Megane Renault Sport is definitely hardcore. If you were afraid that Renault Sport had perhaps gone a bit soft, absolutely not, and I mean that literally, because this chassis is fierce, really fierce. Yeah, unapologetic. I mean, you'll see me being bounced around on this particular road. It's a favourite road of mine, and it's got some very challenging mid-corner bumps and stuff like that. And the Megane, particularly with this Cup chassis, does not take any prisoners. And in fact, I've done a few long journeys in it now, and sort of 2 or 3 hours into the motorway journey, the novelty was starting to wear off a bit. Maybe I'm just getting old, but the quality of this setup shines through and proves that Renault Sport, after the slightly disappointing Clio, has perhaps come out fighting and gone, okay then, you said you wanted hardcore, here's hardcore. So it's interesting, the suspension, because it has hydraulic bump stops, which is something that they used on the Clio, but this time it's all round. What that does, it means that as the suspension gets to the bottom of the stroke, it's almost like an additional hydraulic damper. It's rally car technology. So it means that the springs can be quite fierce, but when you bottom out, you don't get a horrible thud, and the car retains its control. So I'm going to talk like a bit of a road tester now, but what it means is that the primary ride, which is the springs basically going through the normal suspension, is really fierce, really stiff, but the secondary ride, which is kind of potholes and lumps and things like that, are actually dealt with really well. So it's a strange mix, because the springs are really, really fierce, but and what this car is about, as I just found out through that turn, is this is a grip car. If you're the kind of person who obsesses over 0 to 60 and things like that, as I've said, forget this car. You're not going to understand it. You're not going to appreciate what this car is about. This is a car about carrying speed, not building it. So it's not the quickest car in its class by the stats, but who cares about the numbers, because what this car delivers on is feeling, and that's where Renault Sport have always done really well. Now, it doesn't feel particularly fast, I will admit that. The 1.8 engine is alright, but it doesn't feel like a firecracker, and certainly the kind of 2-litre engines in the Golfs, whether they're GTIs or Rs, and the Seats have a bit more punch. The Civic feels absolutely deranged in every respect. So if you're expecting a kind of thrilling punch in the back, the Megane it's quick enough. It's not slow, don't get me wrong, but that's not its forte. That's not where it delivers. Where this car delivers is in the corners, and the grip through this Cup chassis is just astonishing, positively scary at times. It just digs in, and with that four-wheel steering. Now, there's an interesting thing about the four-wheel steering as well. In the usual way, at lower speeds, the wheels go in opposite directions to give a greater sense of agility, tighten the turning circle and that kind of thing. And then at high speed, again in the usual way, they go the same way to increase stability. Interestingly, what Renault has done with the modes is, in the race mode, bear with me on this, it's all very technical. In the race mode, the threshold for the wheels going from opposite to same direction is raised from 37 miles an hour to 62, I think, something like that. Anyway, the point being that in race mode, it keeps that more agile setting of the wheels going in opposite directions up to a higher speed. So you keep that sense of, well, the old school sense of Renault Sport agility up to a higher speed in the handling envelope. So they've obviously deliberately tried to keep that kind of feisty traditional Renault Sport character, but engineered it through the new tech, and that to me is quite interesting. So, as I say, when I first heard about four-wheel steering, I thought, gimmick, Why does it need it? You know, Renault Sport's never had any trouble feeling sharp before. Why do they need to resort to extra tech, extra weight, all this kind of stuff? But the way they've applied that technology is really interesting, and sure enough, this car feels properly agile. It feels sort of Clio agile in the turns, but it's got that kind of bigger footprint, that kind of Megane sense of being tied down. It's a really interesting combination, and you can feel it all working as well. So that diff, for instance, now I'm saying it's a slightly more aggressive setup than they used on previous Meganes, and you can feel it. Now, even for all that kind of fancy perfo hub suspension strut stuff, there's a reasonable amount of feedback through the wheel when you're accelerating. So as you can see from the way it being jiggled around on the bumps, from the way the wheel wriggles round under power, this is not a relaxing car to drive. This is full on. This car is super aggressive, and it wants you to know about it. So, as I've said, if you're expecting to get into this and have a relaxing drive, look somewhere else, because this is not the car. And that's good, I think. As I say, I was worried that Renault Sport had perhaps lost the plot, particularly after that disappointing Clio, which had gone very soft and all-rounder compared with its previous car. And in fact, Renault Sport had said, we want to appeal to a broader range of people. And it's like, well, why? You were appealing very well to a very happy and hardcore section of your audience, so why dilute the magic? So, coming back to the Megane, that is why this kind of hardcore nature is good news, I think. And Renault has kind of pulled it back. Now, how does it compare with competition? Now, I think I mentioned the Hyundai i30N in the introduction to this, and that, to my mind, is kind of the car that most closely targets Renault's way of doing things, but also the Civic, which has got a similarly hardcore mechanical spec and kind of goes after the kind of wild side. So Renault is kind of in a difficult position because it's being pinched between other manufacturers who are taking what it's done before and kind of stealing its territory, really. So that is why I am so relieved that the Megane 280 has not dumbed down, it's not diluted itself, it's kind of rolled up its sleeves, and it's come out fighting. So from an initial point of worry and pessimism and a bit of kind of rose-tinted, oh, they don't make them like that anymore, thankfully, in the case of Renault Sport, it turns out they do, and then some.